Good evening. Welcome to all of you that have joined us this evening virtually online. This is going to be the first of a couple of workshops that we're doing. I'm your Fire Chief, Nico King. Happy to be here tonight. We have some great panelists tonight for our discussion. Tonight we've decided to talk about some home hardening. We're going to talk a little bit about our fuel modification process, and we're going to talk about fire-wise communities. This all started, of course, when we saw the fires happen January 7th in LA County. And as a result of those devastating fires, of course, our community and our electeds started asking the questions, how ready are we for the next event that could happen here? So in 2019, there was a subcommittee of council that consisted or led by Council Member Bob Whalen and Council Member Sue Kempf. And there was a long list of action items that the majority of them had been completed, but we thought it would be great to revisit not only that list, but to engage all of our subject matter experts, engage you, our community, to make sure that our plans are complete and they're thorough, they're vetted, and they're communicated to you. So this evening is that one part of that effort in connecting with everyone. We're going to do some presentations, but the big part of this evening is to get some questions from the public and hear some comments from the public, because that's what this evening's about. So as we get started, I'm just going to introduce everybody. We have joining us from CAL FIRE, Captain Joe Kennedy. Thank you for being here tonight. He'll be talking about the fire-wise communities. I don't know if you could see us, but to my left is our emergency coordinator for the city of Laguna Beach, Sarah Limones. Next to her is our fire marshal, Robert Montagami. And then joining us from the Laguna Canyon Foundation, we have Chris Gort and Alan Kaufman, who will be answering any questions that you have about our fuel mod. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the emergency coordinator, Sarah Limones.
Thank you, Chief. So the format for tonight's town hall meeting is where, like the chief said, we'll have a couple of presentations and then we'll turn it over to a Q&A format. And the way we're going to do that is we'll hold all the questions until after the presentations. And then if you want to raise your hand on here, then I can go ahead and I'll call on you and unmute you and you'll be able to ask your questions and then I'll put you back on mute. So we can get started with our first presentation. All right, I'll turn it over to our fire marshal.
Good evening. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to present some information to our community to give them a little more information as to how they can protect their homes against a wildfire. First, I want to touch a little bit on what the city does to mitigate these hazards regarding wildfire, and then get into a particular program or some guidelines where individual homeowners can take some action to further protect their individual homes from an impeding fire. So it's important that I want to put this in a large perspective as to what city does a little bit, and then get into what you can do individually, because that's what it's really about this evening. So the city has 5 main programs that we undertake to reduce the hazards out there that are associated with wildfires. Our 5 comprehensive program do complement one or the other. And I want to start out with our fuel modification zones. What we mean by fuel modification is the open space area where it interfaces with developed lots, developed homes. There are vegetation out there, and we call it hazardous vegetation, that we refer to them as fuel. So we modify that fuel that is close to structures to give the structures protection. So it does 2 things. It allows for increased time for evacuation and opportunity for firefighters to go out there and fight fires and try to save these structures. So when we talk about fuel modification, we're reducing and modifying that fuel that's in open space area. So the city has a fuel modification program. There are 27 zones, and each zones are open space areas that interface with homes throughout our community. And these 27 zones, 10 zones are the fuel is modified by a way of goat grazing, as I'm sure you have seen the goats out in the hillsides. And these areas are grazed that are not sensitive land, and not protected species are not out there. We do take some preventive measures as well to protect if there are species out there, but for most part, they're allowed in the areas that it's not a sensitive land. And then there's also 15 zones that are managed in what we call high-value habitat and high-value wildlife that are out there, and they are managed by our wonderful people at Laguna Canyon Foundation by reducing the fuel out there by way of mechanical and hand treatment out there. So goats are not allowed to be out there because of the permitting processes required for the city to go through and exhaustive measures that we take to protect our protected habitats out there. So that's one program, which is the field modification program. And the next program is the weed abatement program. And this is comprised of roughly 400 homes that we inspect, 400 sites. Some are developed lots and some are not. These are sites, vacant land and developed land that we actually go out and inspect every year to see how the fuel is progressed throughout the year, and we notify the property owners to reduce those fuels. And if they're not responsive, then the city we go ahead and go through a particular process of eliminating those fuels out there. And the next program is a field modification for new construction and major remodel. This is where a new proposed construction site or a home is going through a major remodel. The city evaluates the vegetation surrounding that particular project, and we come up with a new standard of how vegetation should be selected, placed, and what type of vegetation is placed to reduce the threat of wildfire for that particular project and the surrounding home. So that's another one. And the fourth program is an AB 38 inspection, where we go out and under Assembly Bill 38 law, we go out and do an inspection on properties that are currently being sold within a very high fire hazard severity zone throughout our city. We conduct those inspections, and we conduct inspections according to the defensible space standards, and we give a report to the seller that discloses to the home buyer regarding the status of the vegetation. And the fifth program that we have is, of course, our investigative methods that we do, or investigative program that we have. When we receive a complaint, we actually go out and investigate the potential fire hazard and take proper steps to remedy those hazards. So those are the 5 overall programs that the city has to protect your home. So this evening, I want to share some tips as to how individual homeowners can do steps that they can take to protect their own homes at an individual level, and which is really important because these are the variables that we can't control as a city, but the individual homeowner can. And of course, one of the most important elements to protect your home is the home hardening. And what home hardening basically is that I'm going to explain what home hardening means, because it's a technical term that not everyone may be familiar with. So what home hardening essentially is preparing your home for wildfire, which involves understanding the risks and taking proactive steps when your home is threatened by a wildfire. So your home is basically threatened by 3 different ways from an impeding wildfire. One is a direct flame, and this typically comes from a wildfire or neighboring house that may be on fire. Another one is by radiant heat, and this typically comes from a nearby burning object such as shrubbery or furniture that may be in the backyard or in the side yard. And then, of course, there's the flying embers, which is very typical from a wildfire nearby. And these embers that can particularly be destructive because they can travel up to a mile and ignite a home. So when you harden your home, it really protects you from these 3 hazards. And so if we can go ahead and start our, okay, all right, thank you. So increasing your home's chances of survival when a fire strikes is doing that, it starts by hardening your home. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to go through some of these really quickly and touch on these. Some are low cost, some may not be, but overall it's pretty low cost, except the first one I'm touching on this here. So when it comes to replacing your roof, you should replace it with a Class A roof. And this is when the material is manufactured to resist fire, radiant heat, and the embers and all that. So it's important to replace roof with the Class A roof. And if we can go to the next slide. Next item action you can take is block any spaces that you have between your roof covering and the sheathing with the non-combustible materials. This is what we call a burst stop. If you can see this, this slide, on the left side is how a roof is constructed, and on the front side, if you walk around your home, if you have this type of material or this type of roof construction, there may be some gaps there, and this is what we call, of course, again, burst stop, where this would prevent actual embers getting in underneath your roof line and starting a fire. If we can go next slide. And of course, installing a non-combustible gutter. This is very important. So if you have gutters around your home for their purpose, please make sure that you have covers, because things do accumulate on those. You may not even have a tree nearby, but neighbors may have a tree or shrubbery that with a wind event, these things end up flying in the air and settling in these gutters and being a threat. And it's something that you may not be notice of when you walk around your home, you enjoy your home, your backyard. So go ahead and take a look at that. And by covering those, it ensures that these elements or these items don't get in there, and you don't have to continue to go up there and have it cleaned out. So installing non-combustible gutters is very important. As embers travel, they'll settle in there and start fires, of course. So, and this would prevent that. And if we can go next slide, please. Next item is to ensure that if you have a chimney, make sure that there is a non-corrosive screen, what we call a spark arrestor, is installed. So in case you do burn wood or any other material, if there are any sparks that are emitted, they actually don't cause a fire. So that's important. That's a very low cost item you can install. And of course, installing ember resistant vents and so forth, and if you can go to the next one, would be beneficial. Great. And as you walk around your home, you can also look at any gaps or any open spaces or any vents that may be open, exposed to these embers as they fly around during a wildfire. This covers really comes in handy. So as you remember, again, I alluded earlier, embers can travel up to a mile, and this low-cost item can really save your home. So as you walk around, see if there are any openings and obtain some of these low-cost covers and install them throughout your house. Some of these screens may be cut and actually tailored to the size of the vent that's open. And you can install them. They don't have to be square. Some of them are round, some may be different shapes. So there are screens out there manufactured for this use that you can utilize and install according to the size and shape of those open vents. If we can go to the next item, please. And as you do look around your structure, around your roof line, it's important to caulk and plug any gaps that are exposed to prevent those embers coming in. So if you have an opportunity to get in the attic area or anything underneath the decks, if you have open exposed areas, it's important to caulk those with fire-resistant materials. They're readily available through a website or stores, and you can obtain those. And any handyman person, if you not willing to take on this task yourself, it's fairly simple to caulk these open spaces and to prevent the intrusion of those embers. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. And when it comes to replacing your windows, it's important to replace windows with a multi-pane window. When I alluded to the radiant heat, it's important because these dual pane windows actually do work. As you can see in this photograph, that the right side was probably a single pane window, very outdated window. And when you do replace them, these double pane windows actually do keep the heat away. And therefore, the materials that's inside your home nearby your windows do not combust during those events. We can go to the next slide. And as you can also, when you do upgrade your decking or any exterior items or exterior siding, it's important to use non-compliant ignition-resistant siding and decks. As you can see in this depiction, the older home on the right side, the decking is on fire, and that, of course, that fire moved on to the structure itself. And these composite materials actually do resist heat quite a bit from that radiant heat or any sparks that may land as a result of these wildfires. So that is another first line of defense for your home. You may want to consider when you do upgrade your decking and outside exterior siding. You can go next slide. And picture paints 1,000 words in this case. As you can see, this is unfortunately an example from the Palisade Fire. As you can see, the home in the center on the left picture and right picture, that is a recently constructed or upgraded home. And as you can see, they have tempered glass, dual pane windows, and vegetation is away from the nearby structure, at least 5 feet clearance, the fire-resistant siding on the home, and fire-resistant roof and concrete walls, no wood fencing that's attached to a structure. These are all the elements that prevented this home from being catching on fire. And as you can see, the homes on either side of the on this house, unfortunately, did not survive this fire. So these are the home hardening effects. These are the effects that a home hardening can have in order for your home to survive. If we can go next slide, please. Thank you. So not only the low-cost retrofit that I was just going over some of this list, on our website, we also have more comprehensive retrofit guide, for those of you that are willing to take additional steps and you may be doing some remodel through your home. We do have that available on our website as well, that you can thumb through and see what further steps you can take to protect your home. So this is basically summarizes our retrofit guidelines. If you can go to the next slide, please. So if you have any questions or concerns or anything you want us to come out and take a look at your home and maybe do a site visit and provide you with additional detail, of course, you are always welcome to reach out to us, and we can schedule a on-site inspection to come out and evaluate and give you some tips as to how you can further protect your home, and we'll be glad to do that with you. I think that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, of course, towards the end, I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Robert. And now we will turn it over to Captain Kennedy from CAL FIRE, who will talk about FireWise communities.
Good evening. My name is Joe Kennedy. I'm one of 8 fire captains with CAL FIRE's Office of State Fire Marshal Land Use Planning Program. And I just want to briefly go over FireWise communities with you. So the goal, what we're going to talk about tonight is an overview of the program, how to become recognized, and then hopefully have time for some question and answers at the end. For time, I did take the video from the Institute of Business and Home Safety out, but also it dovetails into the discussion of home hardening, if you guys want to look that up on your own. So FireWise is a national program through the National Fire Protection Association, and we at CAL FIRE are the state representatives here in California. So the program goals are wildfire education, and there's different websites to look at, working with your local fire department or a local fire safe council. It also relies on individual responsibility. Each resident is responsible for their own property, and encourages neighbors to help neighbors. Let's say there's a resident that is unable to maintain their property, then the neighbors chip in and help, because it benefits everybody. If my home is safe, then my neighbor's home is that much safer too in a buffer. Next slide. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead on you. Sorry, one more. And one more. Okay. So we are the state liaisons. The application assistance is provided through us. And in a nutshell, it is a volunteer, community-oriented program that'll help you to prepare your home for wildfire. Next slide. So the benefits is you gain insights into the community wildfire risk, and those findings come from the risk assessment that is available on the NFPA FireWise website. It also helps you improve awareness of wildfire safety issues and best practices, and public education is emphasized in the program. And in fact, it's an annual requirement. Next slide. So more benefits is you're working towards a reduced risk of wildfire. You're preparing your home and thereby your community to be better prepared for wildfire. And it's risk reduction and home hardening both. And it frankly helps in firefighting efforts. The better prepared your home is against a wildfire, the better chance we have of defending that home when we get resources there. And being in a recognized FireWise community improves opportunities for grant applications. Now, a little bit on the grant, It has to be through a nonprofit, whether that's a fire safe council, through the fire department, or some other partnership. But there is grant money available to reach some of these goals. Once you've, as you'll see later in your 3-year action plan, to make your community more resilient, there's grant funding available for that. Next slide. So more benefits. It demonstrates a commitment to the insurance carrier. It may reduce your fire insurance premium. That is a question for your insurance provider. We as CAL FIRE do not get involved in the insurance discussion because it's out of our hands. There's a lot of good information on the insurance commissioner's website, and to reach out to your individual provider for more information on that. Next slide. So getting started. The requirements, it's a minimum of 8. It says a maximum of 2,500. I would not recommend that big, just for record keeping and trying to keep track of everything. You want to form a FireWise board or a committee, and that is really based on the size of your community, on how big that board has to be, and then establish your community boundary and create a map. And as evidence in the picture there, it really is that simple of a Google Earth and snap a picture around the community. But it does have to be a defined geographic boundary around that community. Next slide. So then there's the risk assessment, and that identifies both strengths and weaknesses in your community. And for this, you would consult your local fire professionals to assist you. It's pretty self-explanatory, but they can assist in certain aspects of it, knowing the fire history and some of the other requirements that are requested in the assessment. Next page. So once you've done your risk assessment and found those strengths and weaknesses, then comes your action plan. And over 3 years, you come out with a plan to address the weaknesses and maintain or strengthen the strengths that you found in your community. It helps get the community involved and to build the plan and reach this goals to protect the entire community. Next slide. So then, as I said, the education is paramount, and then the risk reduction investment and your educational outreach. So when they say risk reduction investment, that investment is, think sweat equity, and it's 1 hour per dwelling unit per year. So if your community is 10 residences in your FireWise community, that's 10 hours a year of sweat equity work to prepare your home. And that's it. So there's not a lot, involved in that sense. And then you submit your application online through the NFPA FireWise portal, and you receive your recognition. And then you maintain annually your risk reduction hours and your community outreach event. Next slide. So I know that was quick. We can do a much deeper dive if you're interested. This is my contact info there, or reach out. The chief and the fire marshal have my contact info also. But I just wanted to give a brief overview tonight.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Now we'll turn it over to the question and answer portion of the meeting. Again, if you have a question, you can either type it into the webinar chat or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. Matt Lawson, let me click.
Sarah, welcome. I'd like to ask a question regarding another CAL FIRE program called Fire Risk Reduction Communities. Perhaps we could have a little discussion as to what it would take for the city to participate in that. That is not a voluntary neighborhood by neighborhood program. That's a citywide program where the city has to meet certain standards, and it's something we've discussed from time to time.
Good evening, Matt.
Good evening, Chief.
Thanks for your question. Yeah, the fire risk reduction community has been recognized also as a benefit for the homeowners in a community to maintain their home insurance. And we're happy to note that it's one of our goals in our strategic plan that we just introduced. But you're spot on, Matt, as always. It's efforts that the local government needs to take to codify portions of the fire code to make sure that we are giving the best standard of prevention and have the programs that are recognized. And it's a program that, you know, it's the gold standard, essentially, the way the fire prevention programs run in a community. So we hope to obtain that. We have plans to look at that in the coming years. The application for becoming a fire risk reduction community occurs every other year. So it's every 2 years. The window opens and we can apply. So depending on, you know, how quickly we can get to work on that and how large those tasks are, we predict that we're going to be applying within the coming years. Thank you for your question, Matt.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Matt. Next, we have Penelope. I'm going to unmute you right now.
Thank you. So I have a question about, or sort of a wish, I guess, about potential funding. So I think that probably in town there are a number of people who are seniors who are home rich, but who are home rich but cash poor, and would have a hard time either physically doing or maybe funding some of the home hardening. But I know that the Suzy Q partners with the City of Laguna Beach and Habitat for Humanity for their home repair program, and they'll fund up to $5,000 in financial support. But that doesn't include some of the activities that are involved in home hardening. So I guess my sort of two-part wish/question would be, one, could we extend the home repair program that's part of Lifelong Laguna to include the home hardening activities? And two, perhaps we could also come up with some grant funding to extend the funding that the city now has. They'll now fund up to $5,000 in financial support, and Habitat for Humanity maintains the projects. But maybe we could, you know, add to that. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for your question. This is Robert Montegami, Fire Marshal. There are grant programs out there all the time, and as they do become available, we'll make sure that we can have that information available on our website. And with regards to the first part of your question that you mentioned, the program that the city has, I would have to look into that and get back to you on that. So if you can somehow communicate your contact information, and that is a really good question. That I'm not familiar with that program that the city offers at that level. That's not at the fire department level, but that's something I can research and look into. And see, I believe that may be part of the community development department. I'm not really sure, so I'll look into that. But and see if we can modify that program, or if there are any provisions in there that would allow for home hardening. And again, going back to the second part of your question, there are grant opportunities that come off and on, whether through the state, local, county, or even the state level. As we do get informed of those, I'll make sure that we have that information available that on our website. That as you visit our website, that would be there, a link would be there, some information would be there. So we'll do a better job at that as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Penelope, and for the rest of the viewers, we put Robert, our fire marshal's contact information back up on the screen. So if you need to send an email or contact or have further questions, you have that information. Next, we will have Stephen Gordon. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm the president of the HOA in Irvine Cove, which is on the north end of Laguna Beach. And so the community resides in Laguna Beach, but we are also surrounded on the hillside by the Crystal Cove State Park. And then if you look at the map above Laguna Beach, parts of the hills are Laguna Beach responsibility, parts of the hills are county, other parts of the hill are the Crystal Cove State Park, so the state of California. And all of those hills, whether they're state, city, or county, are all interwoven and intertwined. And for better or for worse, they're all dependent on one another from a safety standpoint. Is Laguna Beach, the city of Laguna Beach, reaching out in any way to create a joint effort between the city, the county, and the state of California so that the land that abuts up against all of our communities is actually properly maintained? Because the fuel modification, the fuel zones, all above in the hills, for example, the state park is not being maintained very well at all. It's very overgrown with a lot of brush and a lot of height to it. And we're right now still in rainy season. We haven't even gotten to fire season yet. And that's state park. Then if there's a fire in the state park, that could easily become something that impacts Laguna Beach. So we're all very, very concerned in Irvine Cove, and we're trying to be aggressive about it. But we're very dependent on, I think, a very collaborative effort between city, county, and state.
Thank you for that question. This is Robert. Yes, so Irvine Cove being a private community, there is a fuel modification zone 25 that is the portion of the association that the actual association has a coastal commission permit to conduct fuel reduction out there within the properties that fall within a private area that is owned by Irvine Cove. So there's that first line of defense for that vegetation management. And then immediately in surrounding area, the open space area, we have fuel modification zone 1, which we refer to as Dartmoor zone. And that's the area that's called. And Dartmoor is quite a long stretch along that area of our northern part of our city. And that zone 1 is managed through a goat grazing program. And that zone actually is well over 30 acres, about 31.2 acres of land that we manage fuel out there. And a good portion of that is by goat grazing. And part of that zone, it is owned and managed by the local water department as well. And they have been sending crews out there to maintain that vegetation out there. And the rest of that zone 1 that expands and comes all the way down, that wraps behind, kind of close to where the amphitheater is out here, that's all goat grazed. And that extends, part of that, again, comes back down to water department that owns some parts of it. When it comes down to around the water tank up there as well, we send hand crews as well. So it's a large portion of that we do manage and we do reuse the fuel out there.
All right, so Robert, that area that you're referring to is all south of Irvine Cove.
All right.
Everything directly above Irvine Cove is Crystal Cove State Park land and is not managed by goat grazing or by the city of Laguna Beach.
So that's what we refer to as SRA, which is the state responsibility area. And that is outside of the city's jurisdiction. So that is managed through the state itself. We can reach out to our state partners and see what their plan or if there are any restrictions out there for them to manage that fuel.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm asking you to do because you guys have done a phenomenal job of defending Irvine Cove when the fires have come down. And a couple of times now, including 2 years ago, and they almost hit Irvine Cove. And if it wasn't for onshore winds shifting at the last moment, the fires would have come into Irvine Cove, which you guys had Laguna Beach fire trucks in our community protecting us, but it's state land above us that makes us extremely vulnerable.
Okay, great. So my contact information is on here. If you can, go ahead and send me an email, maybe even an overview picture or circling a map, send me exact the area that you're concerned with. I'll look at it when I get back in the office on Monday,
Okay,
just to double check that. But if you want to go ahead and communicate that with me via email, that way I have a track record of this communication. When I do approach our state partners, then I can convey that concern that our local resident has with our state partner, and I think that will go a long way. But
okay,
thank
we will go ahead and do that. And
Right.
also, Robert, we would welcome meeting with you and showing you firsthand exactly the areas we're talking about. And it's very large and vast
Right.
and pretty frightening.
Thank you. And I'll be glad to meet with you guys. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, next up we have Eric.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for taking my call. I believe, by the way, that the chat is disabled currently, if anyone wanted to go through the chat. My question is about one of the things you didn't mention, or maybe you got through it quickly on the home hardening, is what are acceptable, useful fence replacement alternatives? I'm not for fences, but many of us have old, very um, wood infused fences. And what are some replacements that work well for fencings? Since stuff in the market is, if you're going to buy fencing materials, I think vinyl, for example, is very common, but is that something that is at all useful in terms of home hardening, or are we looking at concrete or other solutions?
Great question. Thank you for that. Very important question, because the radiant heat, again, right nearby a structure that would affect your structure, and fences, one of those potential areas that would generate a radiant heat. So yes, so wooden fences are definitely not preferred. In fact, to the current standards, the new standards of development standards within the California Building Code, it does not allow for wood fencing within touching the structure anywhere. So that would not be permissible nowadays if you were to develop a property in a very high fire hazard severity zone. So my recommendation is to, of course, if you are looking at replacing your fence, first check with the Building and Safety Department to ensure if you need a permit or not. I have to disclose that. That's important. And if you do need a permit, go ahead and go through that process. And there are materials out there. There are a lot of alternative materials out there that are pre-treated wood, or there are even manufactured wood, if you will, that you can utilize, and they can be cut and to tailor the size and the shape that you need to install the fence. So we recommend those. And there is a listed product. There are products that are listed. And what I mean by listed is that they have been tested against fire resistive capability. And these products are available, or these manufacturers are available on the State Fire Marshal's website. If you just go to California State Fire Marshal and type in listed product, you get a slew of items that you can look at and manufacturers, and see who manufactures listed products of fencing products that you can utilize, or see what their distributions are to purchase those items or that type of material in order to build your fencing. So I would start off with there to see what listed products are. Some manufacturers, or some products out there that say that they're fire resistive, but to ensure that it has been tested, I would go into State Fire Marshal and see if it's a listed product. If it is, I would try to obtain those type of materials, and then go through the local our building and safety department to see if you need a permit to install the new fence. But vinyl fencing, definitely don't recommend it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, it seems like it's very melty at the very least.
Absolutely.
Okay, next up we have Larry. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering why there hasn't been any discussion of prescribed burns. It's my understanding that the goats and the rest create narrow buffer zones that may not be very effective when the wind is blowing at 60 miles an hour, and prescribed burns in the past have been very effective at mitigating risk. I was just wondering whether that's still an option.
Hi, this is Alan Kaufman with Laguna Canyon Foundation. I'll take this question. In some areas of the state, prescribed fire can be a really important tool for reducing wildfire hazard. However, in the chaparral and coastal sage scrub ecosystems that surround our city, they're not really a very useful tool. First of all, it's very difficult to control a fire and keep it from getting out of control in this fuel type. And if it were to get out of control, it could cause a lot of damage very quickly. Also, because of the high populations in the surrounding areas, the air pollution concerns make it very difficult, if not impossible, to get the proper permits from for air quality. Anything that you wanted to add, Chief?
No, I think you answered that really well. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have, name is Huddy, Huty, and you also put in the chat. So if you'd like to ask your question, you are unmuted.
Okay. My name is Huti and I live in North Laguna. Mine is, I don't live near the, what do you call it, the wildfire zones. I'm more closer to the beach and between the beach and PCH. I have a neighbor who has huge eucalyptus trees, some voluntary trees. She doesn't trim, doesn't want to take care of them. We have tried to talk to her. When it is windy, it actually, I can see it from my skylight, you know, the tree coming. And after all these fires, I think it's become, we are very much concerned. So what advice would you give me? Because I tried to call her and, you know, get her to say hello, and she refuses to even acknowledge us.
Thank you for that question. That's something, a type of question we get here often at the fire department. And overgrown trees can be problematic when it comes to, in relation to your structure. However, when it comes to a fire hazard, how, you know, our area's scope of authority and how we look at, you know, a potential hazard of a tree, regardless of the species for most part, if a tree is green and live and well and healthy, it's not necessarily a fire hazard, even though it may be overgrown, may be unsightly, or it may be a nuisance where, you know, droppings on your property and so forth. So it's not necessarily a fire hazard. I want to put your mind a little bit at ease with that, but it may be more of a property maintenance issue with that tree than anything else. So if it's not dead, it's not dying, not a decayed tree, it's really not evaluated or valued as a fire hazard. So if it is an unmaintained tree on unmaintained property for other reasons, then you're welcome to reach out to the city, reach out to us, and we will go out and take a look. We do have, for example, a code enforcement department that does enforce property maintenance ordinance issues. So that may be a issue that the city can look at that and take an action. We don't know until we actually go out and evaluate, but by all means, you're welcome to reach out to me. My contact information is here, and I will definitely put you in right touch with the proper department within the city to have that evaluated. But thank you for that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate your advice.
Sure.
Okay, next up we have Councilmember Sue Kempf. I'm unmuting you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was just responding. It's a good job on this, you guys, by the way. This is very helpful. I was just responding to Penny Milne asked a question about the program that we have to people make their homes safer through the Susie Q. I actually did that program a number of years ago, and we took about $100,000 of seed money because back from the housing fund, because back then housing wasn't a problem, but so we used that to seed that program. But if we were to do that as a city, we'd have to get grant money for that. There's not that much money available for home hardening out of that out of that program. So, but what I was going to say is we can add that to our list of things to do on our, wildfire mitigation, fire safety plan, to look for grants to help people who need a little help with that. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you.
You.
Next, we have a question in the chat. I'm going to read that. Can we have at least one side of every residential street designated as no parking during red flag warnings? Without that, many streets are choked to a single lane.
In our efforts that we have underway, we're trying to identify some of our most common used evacuation routes, and also some of our inner canyons where fire engines would have to respond to. That's a pretty aggressive statement, I think, to eliminate 50% of parking on all the streets. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we identify those narrow roads and those areas that we need to access. And our plans are to have more limited parking spaces identified during the red flag days that we have. So that's under in progress.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Mo. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Mo.
Hey guys, I'm just wondering, how are we keeping e-bikes from the beaches, and are we giving more citations or anything like that?
Hi, Mo. Thanks for
Hey.
calling in. It's good to hear you on the line. Yeah, we're not really talking about the e-bikes tonight, but thank you for your question. We're going to stay focused on our home hardening and fire prevention efforts tonight. But thank you for calling in. Tuesday night, it's on the agenda. So we're going to tune in on Tuesday night, Mo.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have another question in the chat. Who is reasonable for setting the criteria for empty lots and homes requiring weed abatement? I live in Upper Bluebird, and it seems that the criteria is too relaxed. Am I really required to get a permit to cut down a tree?
Thank you. Yes, so when it comes to vacant lots between existing homes, and that is part of our weed abatement program. If it's not something that we haven't looked at, I'd like to encourage you to reach out to us. Let us know exactly which lot it is, where it's located, so we can put that on our list. And we're always looking to expand our program, of course. And if we're not aware, we definitely want to know that. So please communicate that with us. And I'm sorry, the second part of the question was?
Are we required to get a permit to cut down a tree?
Great question. You may be required. I can't guarantee that. Some trees, yes, some trees, no. But it's best to always reach out to the Community Development Department and let them know what your intent is, why you're cutting the tree down, or you want to remove the tree, and provide them with the type of tree it is, and let them provide you with the specifics if permit is required or not. Not in all instances you are required to have a permit. But I can't get into the details because I don't issue the permit. Fire department doesn't issue the permit. They do. So it's best to reach out to them first to ensure that you are complying with our tree protection ordinance that we have in our city. So yes, you may have to, then again, you may not. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question in the chat. I'm going to read. Let me just scroll up. Are protected perimeters still in the plans?
Okay. I just want to make sure that we clarify the protected zones or parameter zones. I'm not sure if this is referring to field modification zone or if it's weed abatement program or anything like that. So basically, I just want to kind of head in that area. When we're looking at reducing hazards that are associated with fuel out there, we look at protecting the structure 100 feet away out to reduce those fuel, we look at vegetation within 100 feet of a structure. That's the parameter areas that we look at, and that's the parameter that the law actually allows us to look at and reduce the fuel. We can't go beyond that very much because it's not written into the law. Our scope of authority under the law only goes up to 100 feet from the structures. I hope I kind of touch on that. Go ahead, Al. Thank you.
I think possibly what this question is are additional fuel modification zones around the perimeter of the city being planned. And so we are currently working on getting a few. So there was a plan that was presented to City Council in 2013 by the fire chief at the time, outlining a plan for completing the fuel modification program around the city. We've made some progress towards that. We're currently working on a new fuel modification zone in Lower Bluebird Canyon. The next one will be in Upper Bluebird Canyon. And then we're currently working on two more, one in Hobo Canyon and one in the Diamond Crestview neighborhood. And that will complete the system of fuel modification programs in that 2013 plan. However, as part of the Ad hoc Wildfire Preparedness Committee, we're also, Laguna Canyon Foundation is working with the fire marshal to look at the entire city and identify areas that might have been overlooked or that might be considered for additional fuel modification. Very preliminarily, I think we have identified about 15 possible areas that we need to look into more to see if that would make sense or not.
Okay, thank you. And a second part to that question was a loudspeaker warning system and ABH cell service was out during the warnings. The city does have an outdoor warning system, and we also have more redundant alert and warning systems because we know the public safety power shutoffs are an issue and just power outages in general. And we're going to do a deeper dive into alert and warning at our next town hall on March 20th. So I'll leave it at that for now, and we'll move to the next question. My name is Mark, a homeowner in Bluebird Canyon. What is our fire/city stance on homeowners investing in their own firefighting equipment, high pressure water pumps, pool supplied systems, roof sprinklers, etc.? I ask not because I wish to put myself in danger, but rather because the cancellation of our fire insurance and subsequent poor replacement policies at 3 to 5 times the expense has forced me into considering staying and fighting in the case of a wildfire.
Yeah, we saw some of that was going on in the Palisades, both in the Eaton fire. It is listed now with insurance companies if you have added protection in your home, but I would recommend looking at what is recognized by those insurance companies as added protection to your home. We absolutely don't encourage people to stay back with their water hoses. As a matter of fact, hearing from our firefighters that were at those fires, they have to stop their firefighting operation once the mandatory evacuations have taken place. And instead of protecting homes, they're helping people navigate their way out of neighborhoods because they decided to stay and try to defend their own homes. So there's some limitations there in doing so.
Okay, next question. We live in top of the world and planning to have our eaves enclosed. Is there anyone at the city who can help us ensure this is done correctly so we're not investing in something that doesn't actually do the trick if a wildfire should come our way? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Yes. So I would contact the Building and Safety Department, and you also want to look at the listed product that I mentioned earlier on the State Fire Marshal website to ensure those are fire-resistant materials that you're going to be utilizing to enclosing those eaves. But you can also get some tips, and you can also, with regards to installation of any item or material, or modifying a construction, you may, I'm not sure, but you may also be required to obtain a building permit to do that. But just to ensure that you're meeting the standards, the requirements, and all that, and not to work backwards, go ahead and contact our Building and Safety Department to see if any permitting is required and the material that you're using and the way you're applying it makes sense. Our building and safety inspectors can provide you with a lot of that information. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Can someone describe the state law requiring a home inspection when selling a home? And what has the city's experience with this fairly new law's process?
Yes, so that is an AB 38 law that came into effect a couple of years ago. This law states that any home that is being sold within a very high fire hazard severity zone, that the seller is required to obtain an inspection by the local jurisdiction, in other words, the local fire authority, to obtain an inspection and a report based on defensible space standards. And defensible space standards are the vegetation around the home. Based on those standards, to obtain a report and provide that report to the buyer. Now, it's important. I want to reiterate this. This is a disclosure requirement under the Department of Real Estate laws and processes that an inspection is obtained. And this is a disclosure requirement during that transaction. So the AB 38 law does require that, puts that onus upon the seller to obtain that and provide that to the buyer. Now, the also states that there's no enforcement mechanism behind this law for the fire departments or any city to take. The only requirement under that state law is that it provides a year to, if there are any corrective actions as a result of that report and inspection, then the law basically states that during that transaction of that home sale, owner and the seller and the owner or the buyer will agree who is going to correct those actions, cure those corrective actions. So that is basically the whole how the law is written and how it is carried out. The seller gets a report, provides it to the buyer, and they decide between them during that transaction who's going to correct those, if they're going to correct it at all. And they have a year to take care of that. And that's the way the law is written. Thank you.
Okay, Matt Lawson, you are up next.
Sarah, thank you. It occurred to me that recently Governor Newsom made a statement that he basically was suspending all the permitting requirements around CEQA and also around the Coastal Act with respect to fuel mod zones and other actions that could be taken by cities and perhaps by individuals to make their homes more fire safe. Now, as we've all learned, sometimes there's a little less to what some elected officials, some politicians say than meets the eye. I'm not sure if there are time limits to those permits. I'm not sure how they interact with other things. And I'm just curious if that would allow us to move forward more aggressively with some of the fuel mod zone activities and other things that we could do to improve fire safety in Laguna in terms of vegetation management.
Thanks for your question, Matt. The fire marshal and I actually were in contact with the Coastal Commission today and had a conversation. We were talking about submitting our application for zone 16 and 19. And part of that conversation was that declaration. And in response, they stated that the state has up to 60 days, and it's the agencies that are charged with carrying out and overseeing these projects. So there was two agencies that were listed, two different secretaries that we would submit our plans to. But we're still within those 60 days. They have 60 days to come up with the rules of engagement, essentially. So we're moving forward with our zone 16 and 19 for submission for application through the regular process, but we'll be looking for that 60-day list of instructions to see if there's any kind of efficiency that can be gained there.
Thank you, Chief.
I'll add that the Fire Marshal and Laguna Canyon Foundation have looked at other areas that can be mitigated. So we are coming up with additional projects that we're going to deem as priorities. So we will take full advantage if this efficiency truly exists and get some more fuel modified in other areas of the city.
Okay, next question. If we were to place sprinklers on top of the house, does this take away from the water needed by firefighters?
Great question. Yes and no. Depends on how many sprinklers, how many homes do that, and there's mixed reports or mixed opinions as to exterior sprinklers. I do want to keep this in mind. Do want you to keep this in mind is that generally the way the fire sprinklers, especially residential, or rather most fire sprinklers work, is that they get activated based on a radiant heat at a certain temperature. And exterior fire sprinklers generally are rated at 200 degrees. Because of direct sunlight hit, you do not want those sprinklers activated because the water will continue flowing until you actually shut off that valve. So if there are enough, so first part of your question is if there's enough homes that in a line of developed lots that have these sprinklers installed that could, especially on the hillside where we rely on gravity water tanks and so forth, that could have an impact on the water flow and the pressure that the firefighters will be relying on those hydrants. And realistically, at an individual home level, from an impeding large wall of fire, the small sprinkler heads are not going to have much effect if they are activated based on that radiant heat, because normally a residential style sprinkler head, from each head, you're only going to get about 17 gallons per minute of water flow maximum. And if you have 2 or 3 or 4 sprinkler heads that are being activated from the same line of water, after 2 sprinkler heads, you're going to get lower pressure of water. So it's as more sprinkler heads are activated based on that heat, you're going to get less water coming out of those individual heads. So it's important. However, there are different applications out there. So if you do decide to install one, I don't want to get too detailed into this because it gets very technical. If you decide to install one, the appropriate use would be to have a remote control on your phone app or what have you, is to utilize those for a short period of time to water down your roof, water down your nearby vegetation perhaps, and shut them off and leave when you need to evacuate to give your home a little more chance of survival from impeding from the ember cast. I can see those applications that has its limited use for those types, but it's very limited in those instances. But they don't really do a lot of work. But if you're going to use it in those instances, you have complete control of those sprinkler heads, it can be beneficial. Thank you.
Okay, next question. I recently hiked behind a neighborhood in the southern part of San Clemente and saw there was a bulldozed buffer zone about 50 feet wide between the open space and the homes at the top of the neighborhood. As much as I hate to disturb nature, I'm wondering if something like this is being considered for our highest hillside neighborhoods, such as Arch Beach Heights and Top of the World.
Yeah, so first of all, the areas where there is high or very high value habitat are subject to coastal development permitting currently, and that would prohibit us from clearing all the vegetation. Even if those rules weren't in place, there's several unintended consequences that that clearing all of the vegetation can cause. First of all, they can destabilize the slope and lead to greater chances for erosion. Also, leaving some vegetation in the zone actually reduces the number of embers that will impact the house above it. It breaks up the airflow and it knocks some of the embers out of the air so that fewer embers are kind of fire hosing into the structures. So it's actually beneficial in that way. Also, when you leave some vegetation in the fuel modification zone, it acts as what's called a shaded fuel break. And so that vegetation shades the ground and keeps the humidities higher and the temperatures lower, and thereby reduces the potential intensity and the rate of spread of the fire. And finally, if you remove all the vegetation, from an area. As they say, nature abhors a vacuum, and those areas will often be reinvaded by annual grasses and weeds, which can actually be more flammable than and more contiguous and lead to faster fire spread than the shrubby perennial fuels that are there now.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or any more hands raised. So last call for any questions.
All right. We just want to thank everybody for tuning in and thank you for your great questions. We've taken a lot of notes. We'll be taking action on a lot of things that we've heard tonight, and we'll be holding another one of these soon. This meeting was recorded, and we'll get it posted to the fire department website and or the city's website. So thanks again for joining. Have a good night.